Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Tuesday, March 5th, 2024. President Joe Biden announces a rule to cap credit card late fees at $8 versus the current average of $32, plus a Justice Department Federal Trade Commission strike force on unfair and illegal pricing. House and Senate are back in session, and this week they'll be voting on a package of 6 fiscal year 2024 spending bills, which will need to pass and be signed into law by Friday to prevent a partial government shutdown. Senator Krysten Sinema, independent from Arizona, announces she's not going to run for re-election this year, saying in a video, "Because I choose civility, understanding, listening, working together to get stuff done, I will leave the Senate at the end of this year." It's Super Tuesday, 15 states and American Samoa holding presidential primaries or caucuses. We'll hear from National Journal Hotline editor Kirk Bado about the race between Republican candidates Donald Trump and Nikki Haley. Retiring Republican Congressman Patrick McHenry, chair of the Financial Services Committee, talks about lessons learned from last year's bank failures. Retiring U.S. Special Envoy for Climate John Kerry discusses what he says has been accomplished on the climate front during his time in that office, plus the latest on the Israel-Hamas ceasefire talks from the White House and Pentagon. And the Iowa congressional delegation recognizes home state college basketball hero Caitlin Clark. That and more coming up on Washington Today. An article at CNN, federal regulators finalized a rule on Tuesday to cap most credit card late fees at $8 as part of a broader push by the Biden administration to eliminate junk fees. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau estimates the new regulation, first proposed last summer, will save families more than $10 billion a year by cutting fees from an average of $32. The new rule applies to large credit card issuers, those with more than 1 million accounts. These companies represent more than 95% of total outstanding credit card debt, according to the CFPB. That was reporting from CNN. President Biden made the announcement of the change at a meeting today at the White House of his Competition Council.
Today we're announcing that the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is finalizing a rule that will help stop some credit card companies from ripping you off with late fees. Under the law, banks are not supposed to charge late fees that are higher than the cost the banks have to engage to collect the late payment. But we estimate banks are generating 5 times more in late fees than it costs to collect late payments. They're padding their profit margins and charging hardworking Americans more than a cumulative effort number, $14 billion in 2022. With the announcement of this new rule, late fees are now going down to $8 instead of the current average of $32 late fee payments. This action will collectively save families $10 billion in credit card late fees every year. That's the average of $220 in savings annually for more than 45 million Americans who typically have to pay late fees. It's a lot of money. And let me close with this. Fair competition is the key to my economic vision. To build an economy from the middle out and the bottom up, not the top down. And it's working. Wages are up more than prices. Unemployment has reached historic lows. Families are finally getting a little breathing room. Prices are still too high, and they shouldn't be this high. That's why we're going to do everything we can to keep lowering costs for hard-working families.
President Biden at the White House at a meeting of his Competition Council. American Bankers Association President and CEO Rob Nichols putting out a statement. Today's flawed final rule will not only reduce competition and increase the cost of credit, but will also result in more late payments, higher debt, lower credit scores, and reduced credit access for those who need it most. The Bureau's misguided decision to cap credit card late fees at a level far below banks' actual costs will force card issuers to reduce credit lines, tighten standards for new accounts, and raise APRs for all consumers, even those who pay on time. That was the statement from the American Bankers Association president. President Biden today also announcing a new federal strike force co-chaired by the Justice Department and Federal Trade Commission to, as the White House puts it, root out and stop illegal corporate behavior that increases prices through anti-competitive, unfair, deceptive, or fraudulent business practices. And there's a new FCC proposed rule announced today that would ban bulk billing arrangements, in which landlords or providers charge everyone living or working in a building for internet, cable, or satellite services, even if they have not opted in. Story from thehill.com, a package of 6 bills that needs to pass by Friday to avoid a partial government shutdown is drawing intense fire from conservatives in both chambers who are zeroing in on more than 6,000 earmarks buried in the package. The spending package was initially expected to pass easily, but now faces a rocky path in the Senate, where it's become a political football in the ongoing battle between the GOP leadership and Trump-aligned conservatives. If conservatives drag out the process, they could force a short shutdown over the weekend. That was from The Hill. The Senate Majority Leader, Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, spoke about the spending bills today on the Senate floor.
On Friday, Congress will then face another funding deadline, whereupon the government will begin shutting down unless both chambers work quickly, decisively, and with bipartisan cooperation. On that front, we are thankfully off to a very, very good start. Sunday evening, negotiators reached a long-sought bipartisan and bicameral funding deal on the first 6 appropriation bills. And we did it. We passed these bills without devastating cuts or poison pill riders pushed by the MAGA right. It's not been easy to complete the appropriations process in a divided government. But after a lot of persistence, we now have 6 bills that will preserve significant investments for American families, for moms and children, for America's clean energy, for America's veterans, and more. It took a lot of work to make it happen. Appropriators worked through the entire weekend. So did my staff. So did I, in fact. And we've been working on this every day for months. The important thing now is for both chambers to move quickly. The House is set to take up these appropriations bills tomorrow, where hopefully they'll pass. And as soon as the House sends the appropriations bills over to the Senate, I will put these bills on the floor so we can have them on President Biden's desk before Friday's deadline. But the clock is ticking. And because of the State of the Union on Thursday, we need to cooperate to move extra fast to get these bills through. Between now and Friday, the watchwords for the Senate will be cooperation and speed.
Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer on the Senate floor. More from the Hill article. Unveiled Sunday, the 6-bill spending package provides roughly $460 billion to fund a handful of agencies through September, including the Departments of Agriculture, Interior, Transportation, Housing and Urban Development, Veterans Affairs, Justice, Commerce, and Energy. Congress faces a Friday deadline to pass legislation, while funding for the remaining agencies lapses on March 22nd. Senator Krysten Sinema, independent from Arizona, said today she is not going to seek re-election this year to a second term. She switched from Democrat to Independent in 2022. New York Times article writes that she faced potentially long odds in another race. Her decision to bow out of the race now sets up a showdown directly between Representative Ruben Gallego and the eventual Republican nominee, Kari Lake, the former nominee for governor and close ally of former President Donald Trump, who is championing his baseless election fraud theories, is the leading candidate in the Republican primary, though Mark Lamb, a sheriff, is also running. That was from the Times. Senator Sinema made the announcement in a video.
In 2017, I warned we were approaching a crossroads. Our democracy was weakened by government dysfunction and the constant pull to the extremes by both political parties. I promised I would do my best to fix it, to protect and defend our Constitution, to listen to others without judging, to focus on what unites us, and to make Americans' lives better. Through listening, understanding, and compromise, we delivered tangible results that make America safer, stronger, and more prosperous. Yet, despite modernizing our infrastructure, ensuring clean water, delivering good jobs and safer communities, Americans still choose to retreat farther to their partisan corners. These solutions are considered failures, either because they're too much or not nearly enough. It's all or nothing. The outcome, less important than beating the other guy. The only political victories that matter these days are symbolic, attacking your opponents on cable news or social media. Compromise is a dirty word. We've arrived at that crossroad, and we chose anger and division. I believe in my approach, but it's not what America wants right now. I love Arizona, and I am so proud of what we've delivered. Because I choose civility, understanding, listening, working together to get stuff done, I will leave the Senate at the end of this year.
Senator Krysten Sinema, independent from Arizona, in a video posted on X announcing she is not going to run for a second term. When she won election in 2018, she was the first non-Republican to win a U.S. Senate seat from Arizona since 1994. Today is Super Tuesday in the race for president. 15 states holding a primary or caucus, plus the territory American Samoa. The first polls will be closing in Vermont and Virginia at 7 p.m. Eastern, then North Carolina at 7:30 p.m., and then at 8, Alabama, Maine, Massachusetts, Oklahoma, and Tennessee. Later tonight, Arkansas, Colorado, Minnesota, Texas, Utah, and California. And the last results will be coming in from Alaska. Polls close there at midnight Eastern. C-SPAN spoke with Kirk Bado, editor of National Journal's Hotline, about the Republican candidates, Donald Trump and Nikki Haley.
What matters right now is not a question of if, but rather than when. When does former President Trump reach that delegate threshold to clinch the nomination right now? Now, Nikki Haley, after losing in her home state of South Carolina and then losing in Michigan a few days later, vowed to stay into the race until Super Tuesday. And this could be a little bit more of a litmus test for a future campaign rather than the one right now. All the available polling has Trump leading her right now. The best case scenario for her is peeling off a few delegates in some of the congressional districts. There's 8 states of the 15 that you mentioned that reward delegates at the congressional level. She's not really favored in any of the statewide races. Her best bet is going to be either in Vermont, maybe Massachusetts. The polling there is a little bit older. So it's now a question of when does Trump pass that delegate threshold? Now, he needs about 1,215 delegates. He has, after last night and after the North Dakota victory, about 273 delegates. The number I'm watching tonight is about 1016. If Trump can walk away after tonight with about a little bit over 1,000 delegates, he's going to be on pace to mathematically clinch the nomination in just 7 days.
So you're it's about a third of the GOP delegates are awarded in Super Tuesday, which is today. Are those delegates binding, and are there any exceptions to that?
There are a few exceptions to this. Minnesota, for example, has a few unbound delegates, but for the most part, they will be bound to the results here after today. And there are various nominating contests, whether that's a primary or that's a caucus. Again, Trump is heavily favored in all the statewide races. What we're going to be watching at Hotline a little bit more specifically is those congressional level races. Like we said, 8 states have delegates awarded at the congressional level. And what we're really looking for are those high education level congressional seats. Our own Zach Weiss wrote a really interesting story about this, looking at the delegate math, and he found that about 26 of the congressional districts right now have an education level, or at least a college degree, of about 40% or more of voters have at least some college degree. And those are the areas in the past where Nikki Haley has performed the best in the 4 major nominating contests already. So if she's going to get any delegates, it's going to be in those about 26 districts across 8 states.
And to be fair, Nikki Haley did win the DC GOP primary.
She did.
So does that tell us anything?
It tells us more about DC Republicans than it does about Nikki Haley right now. I think about less than 2,000 people actually voted in that. It's a party-run primary that was basically all conducted in a hotel ballroom over the course of 3 days. But again, DC, going with the theme of that diploma divide between Trump and Haley voters, is very highly educated. There's a lot of high-educated Republican voters who aren't necessarily Trump's bread and butter here right now. If you look at the one other congressional district that Nikki Haley won, South Carolina's 1st district, it's the Charleston area seat, very highly educated, could be a little bit swingy. And the one county that she won in Iowa way back in January was Johnson County, which is home to the University of Iowa. So if Haley's going to do well anywhere, it's places that look a lot like DC. So Virginia's voting voting later tonight. Look for Northern Virginia especially to break toward Haley. Could that be enough for the a statewide win? I'm a little doubtful, but those are the areas she has to really overperform.
Kirk Bado, editor of National Journal's Hotline on C-SPAN's morning program, Washington Journal. And tonight, C-SPAN's live coverage of Super Tuesday primaries starts at 8 p.m. Eastern here on C-SPAN Radio, C-SPAN Television, streamed at cspan.org, on the C-SPAN Now app. On your smart speakers, say play C-SPAN Radio. We'll have all the results from Maine to Alaska. Hear directly from the candidates as they speak from their campaign headquarters. We'll get analysis from reporters on the ground in states like Virginia, Colorado, and Utah about what issues are important to those voters, plus your calls and social media reaction. It all begins at 8 p.m. Eastern. Former First Lady Michelle Obama's office says she is not running for president despite recent speculation. In a statement to NBC News, Crystal Carson, Director of Communications for the former First Lady, said that she has expressed several times over the years she will not be running for president. Mrs. Obama supports President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris's reelection campaigns. From Associated Press, Black Americans have endured considerable injustices and barriers to prosperity and equality throughout history, U.S. history, but their social, economic, and political advances in the 60 years since the enactment of major civil rights legislation has been unsatisfactory, according to a new annual study on racial progress. The State of Black America report by the National Urban League, which has compiled research and analysis on the status of Black Americans in the U.S. for decades, cites legal challenges to the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and backlash to efforts meant to advance racial progress, such as affirmative action and diversity, equity, and inclusion policies, for decelerating progress. That was from Associated Press. The National Urban League is holding its Empowerment Summit in Washington, D.C., and the president and CEO, Mark Morial, spoke today about this report.
We index at about 76% of where white Americans are. And I encourage you to look at the index. So the index is an average. Here's the thing. You see an improvement in the last 2 years. That improvement is probably the largest 2-year improvement we've seen in the past. However, at this pace, parity is 180 years away. Now keep this in perspective. We are like a caboose on a train. So over the last 50 years, has the high school graduation rate in the black community gone up? Yes, it has. Give a hand. Give a hand. But the rate for white Americans has improved too. And that's not a bad thing, but we remain behind. Ditto for the college matriculation rate. And for many, many areas, we've made progress, but we've not made relative progress to the overall improvements in the country. And that's the paradox of this index.
Mark Morial, National Urban League President and CEO, at today's summit in Washington, talking about the State of Black America report from the League, and within it, what they're calling the Equality Index, covering categories such as economics, health, education, social justice, and civic engagement. More from the Associated Press article on the report. The Urban League study also evaluates President Joe Biden's performance in office and finds his administration's efforts fall short of promises made to Black Americans, even as the president faces significant opposition from Republican lawmakers and some in his own party. Congressman Patrick McHenry, Republican from North Carolina and chair of the Financial Services Committee and former temporary House Speaker, is retiring at the end of this term, his 10th, today speaking at the Brookings Institution at a forum titled 1 Year Later, Lessons Learned from the March 2023 Bank Failures. The congressman was interviewed by Aaron Klein, who is with the Brookings Institution, a senior fellow, and a former Deputy Assistant Treasury Secretary for Economic Policy in the Obama administration.
The rule of law is that deposits over $250,000 are uninsured. And if your bank fails, those are potentially at risk. Since this turmoil of the 3 banks in March and then First Republic, there have been 2 small banks that failed, both of which were purchase and assumption resolved at pretty large loss risks. But the rule of law is still out there. When is the next depositor, uninsured depositor, going to lose money in a bank failure?
Well, this is a bad takeaway from the lack of proper operational control at the FDIC. And what I think is Chairman Gruenberg not being willing to make the big decision the first weekend. He eventually made the big decision, and I think he did well in the following couple of weeks. That initial weekend, though, he clearly failed. But in the following 2 to 3 weeks, he did make very difficult decisions for somebody with his record to fix and resolve these institutions. So the bad takeaway here is that a failed institution is completely backstopped based off some arbitrary line in the sand that the Treasury and the FDIC just dreamed up. That is a very bad takeaway from this crisis. We have to make it clear that uninsured deposits are uninsured, number one. Number two, we also have to make it clear that usually all depositors are made whole in bank resolutions. That's right. It's a rare exception where you have account losses, but we've had 0 account losses for those that are insured. So I think we have to ensure that the customer actually knows what's at risk. There's a lot of discussion with the FDIC about and getting data flows on what is the proper level of FDIC insurance. 250 is an arbitrary number, completely arbitrary. The 250 number, the origin of the $250,000 deposit number, you know this.
Oh, I do. I lived it.
Was a pay-for Dodd-Frank. It is Congress burping this up because the CBO gave us a score that 250 could help pay for the regulatory costs of implementing Dodd-Frank. Number one, they undershot the regulatory cost, the CBO did, and they've overshot, well, it's just an accounting game, a shell game for the CBO on 250. So there is no science behind 250. There's no art of measuring this against risk. I'm happy to review this. I'm happy to understand this, but it needs to be data-driven rather than the instant reflex that many policymakers had to ensure everyone ad infinitum, which would then nationalize our banking system, which is an absurd takeaway.
It's against, I've written about this, the principles of FDR were to protect the little guy, not the venture capitalist with $500 million at the bank. I'm sorry, Bill Ackman, your money is at stake. If you don't want it at stake, buy treasuries. And companies and corporate treasurers, I'm sorry, if that's your job, that's your job.
Conversation with Congressman Patrick McHenry, Republican from North Carolina and chair of the Financial Services Committee, and the moderator Aaron Klein, Brookings Institution Economic Studies Senior Fellow and former Deputy Assistant Treasury Secretary in the Obama administration. This was hosted by Brookings. Congressman McHenry is retiring after his current term, which ends in November. The Telegraph newspaper in the United Kingdom has a story. The world is at risk of another financial crisis caused by U.S. lenders' reckless exposure to stricken commercial property markets, the International Monetary Fund has warned. In a research paper on financial stability, the IMF said that a weak tail of banks had gorged on U.S. commercial real estate and could create a repeat of the chaos last year, triggered by the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank. U.S. Special Presidential Envoy for Climate John Kerry will be stepping down from his position tomorrow, Wednesday. President Biden created the Special Envoy post, and John Kerry has been the only one to hold it. Today, John Kerry reflected on the past couple of years and what he'll be doing next at a news conference at the Washington Foreign Press Center at the State Department.
We have changed the dynamic from when I came into this job. We were heading somewhere upwards of 4 degrees of warming. Now, we're not yet holding it at 1.5, we're heading to 2.5. But that's a lot better than where we were. And there are new technologies coming online. There's incredible now energy in electrolyzers, hydrogen, battery storage, new batteries, fusion, the possibilities of exploitation of geothermal is much greater than it was because we now have much greater knowledge about how to do it. And so I'm personally optimistic, but only if we do the things we promised to do. This will be expensive to make the transition through investment. No country in the world has enough money to do this by itself. But if we mobilize the private sector into infrastructure, new grids, water treatment facilities, transportation, laying down the power lines and so forth. Those are jobs. Those are jobs for electricians and heavy equipment operators and plumbers and steel workers and so forth. And so this is a moment of looking at the greatest economic transition that is potential there if we seize the baton and we go do it. And it is larger even than the Industrial Revolution transformation that took place in the 1800s and early 1900s. That's our possibility. And there's no question in my mind that if we do what we know how to do and what we promised to do, we will actually make the world, let me stop myself and just put one thing in front of you. Currently, 7 million people are dying around the world every year because of pollution, because of the bad air quality. That's greenhouse gas pollution, folks. We know what we have to do. It's the burning of fossil fuel and not capturing it, the emissions, that is the problem. So we don't need a new algorithm defined. We don't need a rocket scientist to define what's the problem. We know what the problem is. It's simple. It's us. The choices we make about how we light our homes, our factories, power our vehicles, and so forth. And we have new technologies available now to avoid this crisis if we choose to do so. So that's the test in front of the world. And I intend to not move away from this fight. While I'm leaving the job that I'm in today, I believe I'm going to liberate myself to actually be more engaged in the transition itself, trying to accelerate bringing the capital to the table, bringing the partnerships that are necessary. It's labor intensive, it takes people on the ground, but we have to create the bankable deals that will excite that capital so we can begin to grow in a different direction. And we will wind up with a world that is safer, that is more prosperous, that is cleaner and healthier. And no one should doubt that that's the other side of this journey of transition. It's positive. It's not something to be scared of. It's something to embrace, and the sooner we get to it, the sooner we're able to enjoy the jobs and the benefits that will come with it.
U.S. Special Presidential Envoy for Climate John Kerry at the Foreign Press Center at the State Department in Washington, the opening of a news conference. He's a former Secretary of State, U.S. Senator, and Democratic presidential nominee. And the Biden administration announced that when John Kerry steps down tomorrow, he's going to be replaced by Presidential Climate Advisor John Podesta as the main person in international climate policy for the administration. On Wall Street today, the Dow down 404, NASDAQ down 267, S&P down 52. Washington today continues in a moment.
Hi, it's Nate from C-SPAN. Imagine, 45 years ago when there were just a handful of television networks, C-SPAN first went on the air, bringing an unfiltered view of government directly to America's living rooms. No spin, no commentary, just pure democracy in action.
And it's Shannon from C-SPAN. It was a bold experiment. We finally had a front row seat to Congress, the White House, and the campaign trail, all without government funding.
As we celebrate 45 years and a legacy of unfiltered access, we ask for your support of a donation in honor of over 4 decades of service. Your gift, no matter how big or small, will help maintain this vital resource for access to the democratic process.
You can help ensure another 45 years of witnessing history unfold and empowering citizens to be informed and engaged in the political process. Visit cspan.org/donate today and join our 45th anniversary campaign.
Thank you for supporting C-SPAN, your unfiltered view of government. Visit cspan.org/donate today to make your gift of support. Thank you.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the C-SPAN Now mobile app. It's free and wherever you find your podcasts. Story from Jerusalem Post. U.S. President Joe Biden said on Tuesday that a deal for a ceasefire in the Gaza Strip in exchange for the release of Israeli hostages is in the hands of Hamas, and a ceasefire was necessary to get more aid into Gaza. In response, senior Hamas official Osama Hamdan on Tuesday said that an exchange of Palestinian prisoners and Israeli hostages in Gaza could only happen after a ceasefire, as ceasefire talks in Cairo between Hamas, Egypt, and Qatar continue with no sign of a breakthrough. Hamdan, speaking at a press conference in Beirut, repeated his group's conditions for a deal: an end to Israel's military offensive, a withdrawal of Israeli forces from the Gaza Strip, and the return of displaced Palestinians to homes they have fled in other parts of Gaza. That was from Jerusalem Post. President Biden spoke to reporters at the Hagerstown, Maryland airport while returning from Camp David.
It's in the hands of
Hamas right now. The Israelis have been cooperating. There's an offer out there that's rational. We don't know what. We'll know in a couple days if it's going to happen. But we need the ceasefire.
How close are they
to the hostage deal? I was just saying that. The hostage deal is in the hands of Hamas right now. Okay. Because there's been an offer, rational offer. The Israelis have agreed to it, and waiting to see what the Hamas does.
Do you think there will be a deal by Ramadan?
Well, there's got to be a ceasefire, because Ramadan, if we get into a circumstance where this continues through Ramadan, Israel and Jerusalem, it could be very, very dangerous. So we're trying hard for that ceasefire.
Mr. President, what's your message to Democrats who are concerned about your poll numbers?
My poll numbers, the last 5 polls you guys don't report, I'm winning 5 in a row. You guys only look at the New York Times. They're a great paper.
Can you get the Israelis to allow more aid into Gaza?
Pardon me?
The Israelis, are you pressuring them to get more aid into Gaza?
I'm working with them very hard. We must get more aid into Gaza. There's no excuses. None.
And how's your relationship with Netanyahu these days?
Like it's always been.
Sir?
Like it's always been.
Mr. President, what are you preparing for your State of the Union address?
You'll hear me on Thursday. All right? Thank you all so very much.
President Biden at the airport in Hagerstown, Maryland, back at the White House during the regular news conference with the press secretary. The National Security Communications Advisor at the White House, John Kirby, answered reporters' questions about the ceasefire talks and hostage release talks.
Hamas said today they won't accept a deal that does not include a complete withdrawal of Israeli troops from Gaza. Is that realistic? And if not, where do negotiations go from here?
I ain't going to negotiate in public. We've been working this real hard. As you heard from President Biden just today, that we're still hopeful we can get there, but nothing is done until everything is done, and not everything is done in terms of this negotiation. So what we're looking for and what we want, temporary ceasefire for about 6 weeks. That'll allow us to get more aid in and, more importantly, get all those hostages back with their families where they belong and reduce the violence. That's the deal on the table. And as the president also said today, it's a rational deal. And the Israelis have been cooperating. They have been negotiating in good faith on this. It's time for Hamas to step up to the plate, take a swing, and let's get this thing done.
The Hamas is saying that they have now extended a deal that Israel has not responded to. Israel is saying that Hamas has to accept the deal that you've been referencing with regard to hostages. Can you sort out what's true in both of those things? And can you also comment on, has it been more difficult to have these talks in Cairo without an Israeli representative at the table?
I kind of sort of already did it, Jeff, but I'll take it a different way. There has been, throughout the process of these many weeks, back and forth between the sides, proposals, counter proposals, and haggling over the details and all the modalities of how this is going to work in terms of the phasing of the hostages and how many, and the release of Palestinian prisoners and how many, and how that's all going to take place. There is now a framework. There is a deal, as the president said today, that has been the result of all this back and forth. So the back and forth has happened. There's a deal now, and the onus is on Hamas to accept it. And you had a second question.
Israel hasn't been at the table.
In Cairo. Again, I won't speak to Israel and the presidents or of their negotiators when they get to speak to that. But as I said earlier, the Israelis have negotiated in good faith. They have agreed to this framework. That they have taken it right up to the end. And now it's up to Hamas.
John Kirby, White House National Security Communications Advisor, in the White House briefing room with reporters. Story from Axios. Israeli Minister Benny Gantz encountered harsh criticism and tough questions about the dire humanitarian crisis in Gaza and Israel's war strategy during his meeting with Vice President Kamala Harris and National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan at the White House on Monday, 3 Israeli and U.S. officials said. Gantz, who is considered a more moderate member of the Israeli War Cabinet, absorbed a lot of the frustration the White House has with the Israeli government right now, a U.S. official said. Gantz's visit to the White House enraged Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, who ordered the Israeli embassy in Washington to not take any part in the visit or assist Gantz in any way. That was from Axios. Benny Gantz's meetings continued today with Secretary of State Antony Blinken, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, and on Capitol Hill, the Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and the House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries. Benny Gantz met with the Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell on Monday, but word is that the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, did not want a meeting with him. The Pentagon says that 3 U.S. Air Force planes dropped 60 bundles with 36,000 meals into Gaza today, accompanied by 4 Jordanian planes delivering more supplies. The continuing food and supply airdrops that began last week. The Pentagon Press Secretary Pat Ryder asked today at his news conference if U.S. efforts to increase humanitarian aid to the Palestinians in Gaza might expand to the sea.
What about the idea of a maritime corridor? Has DoD been asked to look at options or see what ships would be available to be able to establish a maritime corridor for aid to Gaza?
So what I can tell you right now is that in coordination with the U.S. interagency and international partners, we are actively reviewing options for a maritime corridor for humanitarian assistance into Gaza, including potential commercial and contracted options. I don't have more to announce at this time regarding what that would be, but obviously we'll keep you updated on that front.
Just one follow on that. Would that include using U.S. personnel, military personnel, in Gaza to help deliver stuff, or is it just offshore at this point?
Yeah, again, so we would be only in a supporting role, are in a supporting role when it comes to providing U.S. government humanitarian assistance. And so certainly were we to be involved in that, it would be in the form of unique DoD capabilities. The U.S. Agency for International Development is the lead coordinator for the government when it comes to humanitarian assistance. And so, again, we'll continue to work with the interagency on what that might look like going forward.
Pentagon Press Secretary Pat Ryder, who's an Air Force Major General, at his news conference today at the Pentagon. Story from the New York Times, Victoria J. Nuland, the third-ranking official at the State Department and a determined advocate of tough policies toward Vladimir V. Putin's Russia, will retire this month after more than 30 years of government service. Secretary of State Antony J. Blinken announced Ms. Nuland's departure from the post of Undersecretary for Political Affairs on Tuesday in a statement noting her fierce passion for freedom, democracy, and human rights, and America's promotion of those causes abroad. That was reporting from the New York Times. More from the State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller at his news conference.
And then I wanted to say a few words about Undersecretary Tori Nuland, who the Secretary announced earlier today will be stepping down from her position in the coming weeks. As the Secretary said in his statement, Tori has an unmatched capacity to wield the full toolkit of American diplomacy to advance our interests and values. She's had almost every job in this department. I shouldn't say almost every job, but most jobs in this department, including this very job here. And I will say, just speaking first personally, I first got to know Toria during at the early days of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And the thing that struck me about her from day one was her clarity of purpose and clarity of voice, which I know all of you probably remember well from her, at least Matt remembers well from her time at this podium. So I know I speak for everyone in the department in saying we will miss her greatly, but we congratulate her on an extraordinary career. With that, Matt.
Maybe you could get her down here to give us a farewell.
One last briefing for old time's sake?
Exactly.
I'm sure she would love to argue with you for an extended...
Yeah, I probably not, but still, it would be interesting to hear her, her thoughts on leaving.
State Department news conference with the spokesperson Matthew Miller and Associated Press reporter Matthew Lee. Story at Stars and Stripes, a tweet on social media about a Department of Veterans Affairs memo banning a famous World War II photo of a sailor kissing a nurse in Times Square went viral Tuesday morning, prompting a swift response from VA Secretary Dennis McDonough denying its accuracy. Let me be clear, this image is not banned from VA facilities, and we will keep it in VA facilities, McDonough posted on X. The X account under the name @EndWokeness had drawn 2 million views by 11 a.m., with the original tweet stating the Department of Veterans Affairs just banned the VJ Day kiss photo from all department facilities. Included with the tweet was a memo from Rima Ann Nelson, the VA Assistant Secretary for Health for Operations that was sent in February to the Veterans Integrated Services Network directors. Nelson's memo had requested the photo be removed and replaced at all VA facilities to support a, quote, respectful, safe, and trauma-informed workplace. The VA confirmed the validity of the memo Tuesday, but said it should not have been issued. That was from Stars and Stripes. This came up at today's White House briefing with the press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre.
Bit of a kerfuffle this morning across Lafayette Park at the Department of Veterans Affairs, running an effort to ban the display of that iconic Times Square kiss photo on VJA at the end of World War II. Was anyone at the White House consulted in the drafting of the initial memorandum? And then did anyone at the White House call up the Secretary of Veterans Affairs and say rescind that memo?
So I want to be really, really clear. The VA is not going to be banning this photo from VA facilities. So I just want to be super, super clear about that. I know, as you just said, you described it as a kerfuffle. There was obviously some reporting on that. I can say that I can definitely say that the memo was not sanctioned, and so it's not something that we were even aware of until you all started reporting on it. But we are not banning that photo, and I'm just going to be super clear about that. Any specifics about the memo and the process over there, certainly I would refer you to the VA.
The White House Press Secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre. Iowa's congressional delegation recognizing the accomplishment of University of Iowa women's basketball star Caitlin Clark, who last weekend became the NCAA all-time leading Division I basketball scorer, passing Pete Maravich. In the Senate, Joni Ernst and Chuck Grassley are sponsoring a resolution. Chuck Grassley posting on X, Caitlin Clark cements herself as the greatest college b-ball player ever as she breaks the all-time scoring record, the pride of Iowa, and leader of a great Hawkeye women's basketball team. And in the House today, Congresswoman Marionette Miller Meeks introduced the House version.
Whereas, because of Clark and the University of Iowa Hawkeyes women's basketball team, referred to in this preamble as the Hawkeyes, women's sports are being covered and talked about at the national level in the United States with the same fervor as men's sports. Whereas the Hawkeyes have sold out games at home at the Carver Hawkeye Arena and on the road in arenas across the United States. Whereas every sold out game is full of young girls watching Clark and the Hawkeyes demonstrate the excitement, competition, and fun that is possible because of women's sports. Whereas women's sports serve as an important way for young girls to develop discipline, teamwork, confidence, and leadership skills, and the achievements of female athletes should be celebrated. Whereas Clark serves as a role model, demonstrating that dreams are achievable with hard work and dedication. And whereas Iowans are proud of Clark and thankful for the opportunity to watch Clark, one of the greatest athletes to ever play basketball, compete for the Hawkeyes. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the House of Representatives congratulate Caitlin Clark on becoming the National Collegiate Athletic Association Division I basketball all-time leading scorer, and respectfully request that the Clerk of the House of Representatives transmit an enrolled copy of this resolution to Caitlin Clark, B, Athletic Director of the University of Iowa, Beth Gates, and Head Coach of the University of Iowa Hawkeyes women's basketball team, Lisa Bluter. And go Hawks!
Congresswoman Marionette Miller Meeks on the House floor today introducing the resolution co-sponsored by the entire Iowa House delegation. An AP article has this note: Caitlin Clark's record-setting game for Iowa against Ohio State on Sunday attracted more than 4 million television viewers at its peak and was the most-watched women's regular season basketball game since 1999, Fox Sports announced Tuesday. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Subscribe to C-SPAN's free evening newsletter, word for word, and get the stories making headlines in Washington sent to your inbox every day. You can sign up at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.